So early in my career, I started working in Asia. And so I'm 38 years into running companies. And before that, I worked for a big company. So I've been doing this for a long time. So early in my career, I just had that exposure where I realized the world was bigger than the US. And then I'm also a continuous learner and I just love to read. So I read a lot about cultures and religion and history. And so I think when you have that appreciation and you have that mindset, it just kind of opens you up to thinking differently. So for me, it kind of developed early in my career and it's done nothing but build through my career.
Welcome to the CEOpeek show, where we uncover the essence of extraordinary leadership by interviewing CEOs with over 90% approval ratings on Glassdoor.
Hello, Marc. Good to see you.
Likewise, Dave. Thanks for having me today.
We got into such an interesting conversation and suddenly I said, why didn't he record? It was like, we should play that. And yeah, so one of the things, since originally I'm from Israel and you actually have that American-Israeli culture in your own company, maybe it will be a good place to start our conversation because I was very fascinated with that. What about you?
Yeah. So SundaySky, the company I run today, is our product team, our dev team, operations are all based in Israel. And in the US, we've got our go-to-market team. So this is my third company where I've had Israeli-American operations.
Well, that's not a coincidence. Somehow you're probably attracted to that combination, looks like.
Well, I think I enjoy it. And then, of course, I think when investors are looking for CEOs, they want somebody that has that cross-cultural experience and those connections as well. Not entirely coincidental, if you will.
So how did you get that cross-cultural experience?
Yeah, so I mean, it really just started with my first Israeli company, but I've been going to Israel just for a long time, but then the opportunity early to run a company that had a team in Israel. But that was really the first. And I think like anything, once you get experience, people notice that. So I'm sitting with a company that's at the intersection of AI, personalization, and video, owned by a private equity firm with Israeli-American operations. So if you want a CEO that has experiences in kind of all those areas, the list becomes short pretty quickly. And so, yeah, I think these things just find themselves to happen as just because of those experiences and criteria people look for.
Just before we click a code, I share with you that a lot of that, and I have a few adventures, business adventures, cross Israel and Asian companies or American companies. A lot of that's probably reflected in my home and my wife, where my wife is American and I'm a former Israeli. And a lot of these cultural differences that exist, right, showed up in our home. And yeah, I'm curious about how it shows up in a business, like any other teams that are cross-functional teams, right? There are some cultural differences and I'm curious how they show up. For example, my wife used to tell me that you are so intense, which I was, right? And I think that is actually part of my cultural conditioning as well.
Yeah. So first of all, I think to a large degree, our functional areas and our strengths are split a bit geographically. So our product team leader is based in the US, but his PMs, his UI, UX team, they're all based in Israel and working together. However, he's very cross-cultural himself. So he's a citizen of numerous countries, including the US and Israel, but began life in Australia. He's experienced living in Asia, Europe, Mideast, and the US. So he's a good person to manage a team, even though his team is in Israel. Predominantly, he has some people in the US. We have our entire development team in Israel and then a number of our operations team there. In the US, it's really go-to-market. And I think what this is doing is playing to strengths. Our people here are doing the marketing, doing the customer success in new logo sales, customer retention, partnership. So there are people close to the customers and close to the market that we serve. We focus on the North American marketplace. So I think that there's some clear roles and responsibilities and also playing to strengths. So we have a very, very seasoned and strong dev team and product team in Tel Aviv that we're very proud of. But we've also, I think, fostered a culture of very good communications and then trust because we have expertise in areas where people are strong. And geographically, they're in those regions as well. So I think we've kind of laid it out in a good way. The other thing that probably helps is that we actually have a fair amount of Israeli Americans that work for us in the US. So, that can kind of help bridge a divide. people that have spent both time in both places. And then actually some of our team in Israel, they've come back to Israel. So they may have lived in the US, and we had two people recently who have lived in the US for over 10 years, and they decided that they want to come back to Israel for a variety of reasons. Often it's family. You want to raise your kids in Israel or aging parents. So we have people in Israel that have had a US experience, and we have people in the US that have lived in Israel. So that also helps kind of bridge some of that communication.
Yeah. So when you mention that executive that has that kind of a global citizen, like live in many countries, which like I had this experience. I lived in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Malaysia. But what is it for you that you felt that developed that edge, that your capacity to be highly effective in cross-cultural environment? Where do you think that pivotal moment for you that say, before that you felt like, I don't, not feeling comfortable or good at that, and now I feel comfortable and I'm good at that. What was that shift for you?
Yeah, so early in my career, I started working in Asia. And so I'm 38 years into running companies. And before that, I worked for a big company. So I've been doing this for a long time. So early in my career, I just had that exposure where I realized the world was bigger than the US. And then I'm also a continuous learner, and I just love to read. So I read a lot about cultures and religion and history. And so I think when you have that appreciation and you have that mindset, it just kind of opens you up to thinking differently. So for me, it kind of developed early in my career, and it's done nothing but build through my career. So I've spent a tremendous amount of time working in Europe and Asia and South America and the Mideast. So, I've had those experiences. So I think that's kind of what's informed my viewpoint and enabled me to work that way. When it comes to Israel too, I'm Jewish. And so there's another kind of connection there too with the state of Israel, and then an appreciation for just kind of the strength of the team and the resilience of our engineers. Israel's always been through a lot, of course, since October 7th of 23, even more. But the team really doesn't miss a beat. They keep on going, and it's quite amazing. What would shut things down here, keep its business as usual there. And so I really admire that strength and culture. That doesn't mean that everybody agrees what's happening. And there's a big gap between being Israeli and necessarily supporting everything that the government's doing. So we have those discussions too, but it's just a great team. So it's made it easy.
And what happened with especially with the American teams or within when there are, since a lot of things of that Israel-US relationship have somehow related to politics and have some kind of a political domain to that, and people have so many different opinions about that. How do you overcome that difference in point of views or tension that may exist or may not exist? I don't know. What is your experience?
Well, there's a lot of similarities between Israel and the US, and that things are polarized in both places, and that the middle is seeming to be challenged, and people are much more on either side and less on having a viewpoint in the middle. So that does become challenging, but that's really not part of company. If people want to talk about it individually or share their viewpoints and they're comfortable doing so, that's fine. But look, I think what we focus on what we have in common. I think in our company, people are very passionate about the mission, about our customers, about the market we serve, about the innovation we're bringing. So I think that's where people pour their energy into things. And I think there's people that are very comfortable talking about the world and the situation, be it in Israel or the US, and there's those that aren't. So, you just have to be sensitive to those types of situations. So, but we have more than enough to do and more than enough challenges running and growing a business. So that's where most of the energy goes into.
That was such a beautiful insight. When you said that the mission, the purpose, that actually unites polarization. When you take polarized point of views, people that come from different point of view, and you create find a shared purpose, even teams that are divided, not about politics or not about even culture. It could just be divided by point of views, or how do we move forward, and you work on a shared purpose, that's actually resolve a lot of the tension that exists. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so, Dave. And I can just give a business example of where I'm sure lots of companies are challenged by something today. Our product has extensive AI capabilities in the product, and there's great alignment in the company about that. But the bigger issue is, how are we using AI in our business? And we're being very aggressive. And there's many points of views there. And people There's people that are very excited about that opportunity, and there's people that are very threatened by what we're doing. Because now that's kind of people start questioning, this is amazing, but what's my job? What's my role? I mean, even if you're very secure in your role, roles are being redefined. If you say a developer's role is to write high quality code, but in the future, they're using tools to write that code, and they're more into architecture, specifying code, ensuring code performs to the way that they've requested the code to be developed. What are they? Are they a pilot? Are they a guide? Are they an architect? Or is it a new definition of what a developer is? I just think there's a lot of shifts going on in business. It can be very divisive. And again, great opportunities, but it can also be threatening. So that's a good example of like, hey, there's a polarizing issue right there that's completely outside of politics or everything else going on in life, just with technology.
Absolutely. Just what you mentioned, actually, now when you said that, I realized that I noticed that, but I was not really seeing that clearly because a lot of my clients actually doing this transformation in their external world, in the worlds of their customers and industries, and the shift to the AI. But when they look inwards, they don't utilize AI sometimes at the level that they supposed to, although their companies actually are playing in the industry of AI, from semiconductors companies that actually build those platforms from AI to other development companies and software development that always talk about AI as a product, but not AI internally. How do we actually leverage and increase effectiveness and productivity with AI? Because it's very threatening.
Yeah. And I mean, look, it's very topical. Today's Wall Street Journal, there was an article just about the impact on entry-level jobs. So this is a very bad job market for new graduates because a lot of those entry-level functions are now being handled by AI in certain companies. But then it brings up a more profound issue. If you are able to do that and gain efficiency, where do you get your developers from? I mean, if you're not bringing them in as juniors, they're not going to become mid-levels, they're not going to become seniors. If the entry level of what a developer used to be is now an automated AI function, an agentic AI function, where's your pool? Where are the trainees, right? So that bottom layer of the workforce that you would then hire up to, what's the next step? What's the evolution of work look like if you don't have those, quote, entry level roles? So there's some I think, very profound changes happening right now.
So how do you deal with conflict when it arises in your leadership team primarily? Because this is where all starts. What happens in organization usually reflects how the senior leaders actually resolve or overcome those conflicts. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think we try to be open and transparent about those discussions. And I would say we're fortunate that there's no lack of agreement about the importance of harnessing the power of AI in the business. We try to tell our folks that in general, you're not being replaced by AI, but you'll be replaced by people that use AI. So if you don't use AI, you should feel threatened. So, and then we're trying to give the tools and training and figure out the right places for that. But we try to have those open discussions. And then we do try to get alignment with the senior team. But then we're also using tools to do surveys of our people and the concerns they have and the threats and opportunities they feel. So we're owned by a private equity firm. They engage an outside service that works with all their portfolio companies. So we're not just getting our performance, and it breaks everything down. You can slice and dice this every way you want, by product teams, by areas of concern. But then we also get benchmarks versus other companies in the portfolio. So we're able to also get feedback. So we do that indirectly. We do that by fostering good communications with folks, but then we also try to have some formal mechanisms of data collection. And so we do an annual survey, then we do like a mid-year pulse survey. So we're also trying to get feedback that can be data-oriented and quantified. So there's a number of mechanisms that we try to have, and then just having open communications. And then I try to just make sure that I'm accessible to anybody. I don't care what day of the week it is. It's Slack, WhatsApp, text, email, call, Zoom, whatever. So that's the other thing too, just being accessible to folks.
So given all these surveys, you get some data about your leadership. And your leadership is outstanding, given that you have on Glassdoor more than 90% approval rate, and the company itself has more than 4 stars or something like that. What do you think is your secret sauce? Did you get it from your team or organization? What is that sense of like, that's the thing that really makes me tick?
I think it's a great team of people. So I think I'm fortunate and grateful to have the folks on the team that we have. So again, I think it's a lot of belief in what we do, how we go about it, how we communicate, how we treat people. I think try to be very humanistic in our organization. I try to impart my philosophy on everybody in the company, which is not always the same as other leaders. And that is, I want work to be number 3 in your life. Not number 1. It's not number 2. It's not the most important thing. It should be like the 3rd most important thing in your life. I'm a big believer that the number 1 thing in your life has to be taking care of yourself. And if you don't take care of yourself, I think it's really hard to take care of others or to be a good leader or to be a good employee or to be good at anything else. So number 1, you got to take care of yourself, whatever that means to you. Your physical health, your mental health, your diet, your sleep, your recovery, your stress, your exercise, however you define it. Assuming that you take care of number 1, then the next thing, the number 2 thing in your life should be everybody else in your life, whether that's your family, your children, your parents, your relatives, your community. You take care of number 1, you take care of number 2. You have like a really awesome foundation that you can build on. And then you can work pretty hard because number 1 and number 2 are in good shape. If the first 2 aren't in good shape, it's really hard to focus on work, or it's very easy to get burnt out on work because there's something else going on that has nothing to do with work that is distracting you, that is impairing you from the performance that you might want. So that's something else I try to impart on teams. Not all CEOs do that. Not all CEOs believe that. I mean, I've heard plenty of people saying work's number 1 and everything else is behind that. I'm like, that doesn't work for me. And so I try to be very humanistic in the approach and flexible. And I find if you do that and you empower people, you trust people, your return on that is very high. And Dave, we talked about the situation in Israel. Of course, you have to be flexible sometimes. You know, the office got closed during the last situation with Iran, but our teams, we had a big release coming up. Our teams worked all through that. We couldn't go into the office. They were working remotely. So just making sure everybody was being very supportive, expressing that support and appreciation. And then at the end of that sprint cycle, just out of the blue, telling people to take a 4-day weekend just for self-recovery. So you just got to do things. You got to be human. You got to be understanding.
I loved how you articulated that 3. It really deeply resonated with me that putting the self in the center, then the family, community, your relationship, and work third. And you said that's kind of a humanistic approach. And I actually thought that I had in my mind that actually that's a really good business decision too. Because as you explained that, if you have the first 2, work will take care of itself. But when I coach a lot of clients and coach executives and others, there is the sense that the pyramid is just exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
The sense that they have that they need to always sacrifice, and everybody's speaking that. I know I'm a CEO right now, so I know I'm sacrificing my family and that to be a great provider. So they put work first, justifying that it serves actually both themselves and the family. And we all know that both of us have some gray hair, that we all know that it's just not true.
The other benefit is when people have other priorities in their life, they actually get better at prioritizing everything. So they have to pick and choose what they're going to turn their attention to at work and not have unlimited time. And you want to talk about tension on a team. If there's somebody on the team that says, I'm going to work 20 hours a day, and there's somebody else that says, no, I have a commitment to my family tonight, but let's get the work done. You're going to have to strike a balance there. People with unlimited time often take unlimited time to get things done. People with limited time figure out how to prioritize, figure out how to get the work done that's most important, that moves the needle. There's business benefits that I think come with having other things in your life that are more important than just work.
So one thing is to have that philosophy as a leader, as a chief executive. Other thing is actually how to embody that in the organization and make it as a culture. How did you do that? And now you're public, so your people may listen to that. So I'm curious to know, what is that? Because many people say, it looks, so idealistic. So you believe in that, that's great. But how you convert your idea or point of view or worldview into culture across the whole organization, I'm really fascinated with that. How you do that?
So my weekly meeting with my executive leadership team, we take 25% of the meeting to talk about something that I think sets the stage. And that is, we don't talk about business. We basically do a check-in. And the purpose of the check-in is for everybody to talk about what's going on in their life, how they're doing. Are they energized? Are they focused? Are they distracted? Are they concerned? My kid's going through something. My parents going through something. Or they're just talking about how proud they are because their kids' little league team made it to the playoffs. So we start by doing kind of a check-in. And the purpose of the check-in is just connect as people first. Also, just to maintain ties when people are geographically spread out across the world. Kind of replicates like if you were all in one location and you walked into a conference room. Before the meeting began, everybody would probably just talk a little bit and catch up. So we try to start our meetings that way. And then we shift gears to the business topics at hand. So on a weekly basis, I make that a practice. I also, with all my leaders, do one-on-ones every week. And I start those sessions off with, how are you doing? It's a pretty simple question. But I think a lot of people just go right to the agenda and they forget that how they're doing might just be, I'm not doing well. Then the next question is, what can I do to help you? Oh, you need some time. Can I take anything off your plate? Can we reprioritize anything? So, or they're just excited and they just want to share something. It's great. You foster that kind of things. And then before you know it, people are sharing pictures of their weekend or what they did. And then it just makes everybody connected. And there's little tiny things like on Slack, like people talking about their kids, having channels for that, having channels for pets. People like to talk about their cats and their dogs and their snakes or birds or whatever they have. So you just do little things. Those little things, though, create connections, make people feel like they know each other, make people feel like they care about each other, because they do. So again, it's not a fancy thing. It's not something I learned when I got my MBA 40 years ago. But it's just, I found that it works well.
Yeah, I love it. When I coach teams, we always check in.
Yeah.
And sometimes I remember like a few years ago, just before Christmas, I check in with a team and it was a 2-hour team coaching session. And the check-in took the whole 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I didn't rush it. Also, I had something in the agenda because it was so important for the team to connect. And the way that you explain it as connection, that's really sense at a deeper level of connection rather than just because many people actually, I invited them to imitate and copy that check-in to their staff meetings, weekly ELT, SLT, whatever they call the senior leadership team meeting. And then sometimes I join them and they do the check-in and it's surface level. So, I went with my kids to the zoo and, I went to visit my parents. So there's a check-in, they share their personal life, but they are not vulnerable in that. So I'm curious actually to hear from you. How do you make that check-in effective to create that environment for people to be vulnerable so that it will accomplish that connection that you mentioned? Because people can share their personal anecdotes, but still not be connected with each other deeply.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll revert back to something ancient as well. On one hand, I was talking about how progressive we are in AI, but the ancient thing is leadership by example. If you're vulnerable, people feel safe to be vulnerable. If you're not, and you never share, how can you expect them to? So if it's something that's really significant in your life and you're willing to share that with people and talk about that, then they may be willing to talk about it themselves too. So look, I think everybody these days lives with really challenging things. I think raising kids is really hard. And I have 4 adult children and I can't imagine raising kids today, honestly. And of course you're still supporting your adult kids, but boy, I think just things get tougher and tougher with social media and with the disinformation, misinformation, bullying, everything else. It's like life's so hard. If you're open with people about that and you express your vulnerability, I think it just fosters that. It's safe to do that. And then people feel that they can. So I think it just starts with the leadership. If I do that and then they become that way and then they do that with their teams, and then hopefully we're getting a community of people that care for each other, have a common mission, a common purpose. And that's what unites us. We don't all agree on everything about what's happening in the world, but we've got a lot of things to agree on.
And also that there is kind of breaking the walls between personal life and professional lives because they are the same. They are intervened in a way, right? We show up at home as well as the same as we show up at work. We think that it's different, but it's very much the same. And when years ago, when I was more controlling person, with a stronger tendency to control, I was controlling at home too. The
Yep.
kids would call me a control freak. So I showed up at home and at work very similarly. And well, I know how challenging it is to parent 3 kids. All my kids are in the 30s, and the last one is going to cross very shortly to the 30s. And this actually the relationship that taught me leadership more than anything else.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I also think that unfortunately, there's some of these things we just learn with time or we change over time. So if you are the person that's had that experience or more time, being able to share that with some of your up and coming leadership, that can be, I think, helpful. So I started my first company in 1987, and I was always the youngest guy in the room. I'm the oldest guy in my company at this point. So most of my ELT are 20 years younger than me, some even younger. And so when you can have a frank discussion to say, the way you're addressing this or the way you're dealing with this person, I used to be that way too. Let me tell you about my experience. Let me tell you what I learned. Let me tell you how I've changed. It's kind of like diffusing an issue. If somebody is like just digging in too hard on something, like just encouraging, and if you yourself used to do that because you used to be more intense or used to be more controlling, just saying, hey, you've got to give some more rope. You've got to open up a little bit. So I think as a leader, if you have those experiences, that is one advantage of age. Obviously, I wouldn't have talked this way when I first started running companies, but time passes and you learn what works, you learn what doesn't. Part of that is because you fail along the way. So if you can help your team avoid some of your mistakes, some of your failures, I think you're being a good leader at that point too. But you're also being credible with people too, because you're speaking out of your own situation, your own experiences.
Well, that's really some kind of a big issue, the generations at work, right? And years ago, generation was easy. We have parent generations, we have a kid generation, our kids are the third generation. But now I look at my 3 kids and we have like 4 generations. Like the older one is millennial, the other one is X, the young one is Z. And actually, I see difference in nuances. I see relationship with the kids, like my daughter, like, I don't want kids, and I said, ooh, yeah, that's interesting. It's not like I worry about it, but they're kind of the strong opinion about none of them have kids. Also, they're in the 30s. And in my generation, most of us had kids at the time already. And I'm curious because I saw how much I grow as a parent. And so my kids, I say, what will replace that experience for people in the younger generation that don't want to have kids? And maybe they put their work at the first place. That's kind of bring me to, it's a very philosophical question, but I'm curious about your point of view, especially because you work with such young people.
Yeah. Look, I think we're in a similar boat. Our kids are, I've got some in their 30s, some in their mid to late 20s. So some want kids, some don't want kids. But the ones that don't want kids, they also have they have a very full life. They have a community around them. So maybe their community is that substitute for that family. Some of those cases, that community are causes they're involved with, things where they've got this common bond and connection and purpose. So maybe that becomes a replacement. It's also really interesting being in a technology person my whole life, and none of my kids are in tech. So it's also super interesting that they've chosen things that are different and really important. So I don't really lose sleep. Like, how would they replace that? I think they'll kind of replace it through other bonds and things in their life. But I think it's a really interesting point. But I'll give that one a bit more thought. It's very provocative.
Well, it's just like the nuances between even 5 to 10 years apart are already felt, while previously they are it's more easy to identify generations. So now all these X, Y, Z, whatever they are, is probably there's some people that see nuances. So as much as the technology accelerates in such a rapid pace, even the difference between how we actually grow into the world is different in the worldviews of younger people. So there are way more differences, nuances that didn't exist before, which was more easier maybe to lead in the older world.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, that's certainly my experience is the rate of change has been constantly accelerating, and that's the only constant. What I hope with young people, with young workers, with education, that maybe this gets us back to some basics. What we really focus on is critical thinking and communications, where I think a lot of times we've focused on pragmatic skills like this is what you need to be an accountant. But you know what? There's amazing accounting tools that are AI based. Should your education be on the principles of accounting? Yes, to a degree. But maybe it should be on being an expert on these tools, but maybe it should be being an expert about how to critically think within the field and how to communicate within the field, things that are still going to be very human. So there's still, I think, there's a role for humans. There could be big changes in like, how do we educate? What do we focus on versus is it just a skill path or is it actually even more of a generalist path? I remember taking one of my daughters to college and just during orientation where they had the parents section, they had the kids section, and being in a parents section, just listening to one of the teachers, this was at a liberal arts school, saying, if I had my way, we would have the only major in this school would be, we would only teach one thing, and that's classics. That's all we would teach. It would all be critical thinking and critical writing based on the classics, and there'd be nothing else. And then people could figure out what they want to do with their life, and then they could get some further training. That always stuck with me. And you know what? The way I think these days, maybe that's even more true because kids are bright. They're using tools from day one. They're starting to use AI tools from day one. And if you can use all these tools, what's really important, what really differentiates people from machines?
Maybe communication. When you say communication, I guess you meant texting, right?
Connections, human, right? And then, of course, that critical thinking too. But I think that people have kind of discounted a lot of that kind of classical education theory in favor of specialized training. But now I think it might tilt the other way. I can dive as deep as I want into any subject that I know nothing about and become pretty proficient in it just by using tools that are available to me. So what's important? Important is how do I think about, how do I ask that? How do I inspect that? How do I look at source data? How do I understand if this is really good information or not good information? How do I decipher things?
And besides that, communication, I really think that's really the gist of how to become really effective in the age of AI. Many people come and talk, hey, I want to be a better communicator. What the hell it means? What does it mean for you? What is actually be a communicator? Is it a better speaker, better listener? Because communication is so vague. What is really want to? And I can see many conversations, we end up in the same place of deeper connection. And that's a challenge because people try to connect with other people, but not being able to connect with themselves. So if you're not able to connect with yourself, with the inner self, how can you connect with others?
An article that's been in the journal recently that talked about, was one of their leadership columns, why it's so important for leaders not to speak first. And I was just thinking about what you were saying. For some people, it's very easy to connect and it's very easy to communicate, but for probably half the workforce, it's not at all, right? So get to your introvert, extrovert. How do you make space for everybody to communicate? How do you as a leader ask people that aren't, the first to volunteer? How do you as a leader not let the person that always wants to speak first, how do you not let them speak first? And get other people to weigh in that might feel overwhelmed by that first person who's always eager to talk and to tell their view. And they take up a lot of oxygen. I think as you move up from, to leadership too, you also need to be sensitive and encourage viewpoints from others. And you need to give room for those people that won't necessarily speak up, that probably have very good perspectives that you want to hear. So I think that sensitivity, just understanding the difference between those that are naturally extroverted versus introverted, especially in a workforce that's with tech, right? If you're in any tech company, I'd say there's a really good chance that your teams, there's a lot of introverts. Heck, developers, I think some people say a lot of developers are on the spectrum. That's okay, but let them know that what they have to say is important too, and allow them place to speak and to share their views. Hopefully this isn't all sounding, quote, woke. I just find that this is like, it's just being a human. And it's my only desire here is that we create a company that delivers great value for our customers, that is a rewarding place for people to work and spend their time, and that we're creating a lot of value that our team will participate in, and that our owners, private equity firm, that they'll get the return they want. And behind them, we recognize there's their investors. And that boils right down to pension funds that are out there. So let's see, you're in California. I think one of our big investors is a big healthcare providers and pension fund in California. But at the end of the day, there's people connected out there too. And they count on us doing a good job to create value so that they can pay pensions. So I think you just have to think about the holistic machine here.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem that when you start to see that and connect with the ecosystem, you can develop more purposeful vision, not stuck in your cocoon.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Marc, it was such a fascinating conversation. I really had a lot of fun.
Likewise, it was a pleasure to meet you. And I think it's really interesting, like the experiences you've had about where you've born and where you've worked and moved and lived, and then being in the US now. And that I think at the end helps change how you view the world too. It's a big place, but at the end of the day, people have a lot more in common. We all probably want something very similar at the end. We want better lives, we want peace, and we want good health, and we want to raise kind and compassionate children. And that's the big picture, and all the details make it messy. But the big picture is I don't care if you're Malaysia or Hong Kong or Singapore or Israel or California. My guess is that the needs and the desires and the wants of people they have a lot more in common than they do apart.
Totally. I'm like you, I'm a globalist. And I hope this is my life purpose is create unity in teams, organization in the world. And that's the gist. That's why what jumps me out of bed, create this unity, create it with my family, which is a mixed family after me and my wife are divorced. So it's our second marriage, and uniting a divorced family, a mixed family is not a job for a fan of heart. It's very difficult, right? And creating unity in organization is difficult. Creating unity between cultures in international companies, it's very difficult. And sometimes it saddens me that I see so many people that don't want that globalization, while I thought that this is so lovely. I just thought that it's so inspiring to be like, I see myself as a global citizen, and I want everybody else to feel that way, that connected, not just our family communities, but see the whole human species as one community.
To that point, I think it's really fascinating is that there are countries that feel much more nationalistic. It's more of a trend these days. But it is amazing when you look at companies that function well, where people come from, where there's incredible diversity and people are multicultural, people are multi-location, but they have something in common. They've got a mission, they've got a purpose, and then people get along. And it just doesn't matter where you're from or what your religion is or necessarily what your politics are. So I hope that countries can learn from business, because I'm much more encouraged by the way things operate in businesses sometimes than I am with the way things are running with governments these days. So
you just described the American experiment.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Marc, thank you so much for your time.
Hey,
I really
thanks for having
appreciate
me.
that.
Enjoyed the discussion. Alrighty. Have a great day.